Travis Wayne Goodsell. We get to talk about anachronisms in Mormonism. Now, anachronism is, trying to explain it simply for you, when you are writing about a past history and you put in that history narrative things, people, places, etc., who did not exist in that time frame that you're talking about. They existed earlier, sometimes later, but when talking about the Bible text and scriptures, it's often a situation of making the mistake by the author of putting something they're familiar with and imposing it on an older culture. And so the first example I'll give you is about coinage in the Book of Mormon. Now, if it's a history book, as is believed, then the use of coinage is a brand new invention. But it's not spoken of as a new invention, per se. It's something developed over time, as it talks about in the text. But the first usage of coinage in recorded history, I'll just read it from Britannica, Britannica.com, Coin Origins of Coins. True coinage began soon after 650 BCE. The 6th century Greek poet Xenophanes, quoted by the historian Herodotus, ascribed its invention to the Lydians, the first to strike and use coins of gold and silver. And so thus the King Croesus of Lydia was the first one to have coins made. And this is in the Greek Empire. Notice it's not in Jerusalem. And you can't just say, well, the coins were spread all over the world. You have to get others from different cultures to accept and use and recognize your coinage. This was just among the Lydians. And so, no, it was not had in the time of Lehi, but he had all that gold and silver, and the cartoon video showed that the coins were falling out of the sacks as they were running away from Laban. See, again, that's an anachronism. It's leading people to believe that there were coins in Jerusalem, in the treasury, or in the homes of various citizens of Judah. And this is not the case. It happened later on. And so the author of the Book of Mormon cartoon video series, Living Scriptures, I believe they are, they threw in anachronisms. They took liberty in the production of their video. And so this is what linguists apply when examining any claims of history. Because if it's a fraud and it's full of lies and it's not an actual history but is actually fiction, which if it were fiction, it would be an error on the part of the author if they're trying to write a serious fiction rather than a comedic fiction. Because the Living Scriptures, he sort of livened it up, made it a little comical, putting some exaggerated character, to the various characters. But as a Mormon, he was also trying to be serious. And it's necessary that in order to be good, you can say that being good is being popular and you get a lot of money for your stuff, but in the realm of literature and scientific value and historic value, no, you have to do your research. That's why people get upset with The Crown. I guess it's a show on Netflix or wherever it is that I don't watch. But The Crown has been complaining that it's historically inaccurate. But the author says, no, I did my research. It is as close to accurate as I can get. And so you have that issue if you don't do your research as an author. People are going to complain. And then you have Galaxy Quest, Tim Allen and Sigourney Weaver, as they, it's a comedy of Star Trek on how fanatical fans are able to expose the sci-fi errors. Those you can get you can get away with anachronisms because you're talking about a future thing, so you can create whatever you want. But as fans, fanatical fans will recognize, you have to still be consistent. The warp core must be tied to whatever else to make sense for the show. And if you have one situation in one show and another situation in another show that contradict each other, the fans are going to notice and they're going to blog all about it with their complaints. Same with Game of Thrones. The fans, the fanatical fans, were furious with the ending. He made it all up. So why are people complaining? Because they didn't like the ending, you know? But again, when it deals with history, you have to be correct. That's why dealing with church history, it is so frustrating, as the church has lied and covered up and deceived and lied about the cover-ups and deceived about the cover-ups and covered up the deceptions and covered up the lies. And Wikipedia is just full of errors that in and of itself become part of the mystery puzzle in identifying the true LDS history. For example, I point out Canandaigua, New York. That's an established location, confirmed. And there are 3 individuals that I have confirmed were involved with that city. Joseph Smith Sr., Heber C. Kimball, and William Morgan. And so if anybody tries to claim some other history that excludes Canandaigua, New York, I know they're a fraud, that they are purposely lying and deceiving us. That goes for critics of the church as well, because Canandaigua, New York is crucial to church history. It cannot be removed from the equation. You can't have it set at a different time frame. You can't have the characters act differently as a result. So this is how you identify errors in literature, is finding out the real history. And so there are certain things with real biblical history in the ancient Middle East that are known. And so when we recognize a biblical passage that says, and it is like that to this day, oh, okay, we're now understanding that it is not at the time it happened, it's much later than when it actually happened. And so we need to be careful now as to whether or not the author is accurate in their history, or if they're trying to create a story for how things are the way they are when he wrote it. And as a result, we know, therefore, from that kind of a statement, which demonstrates a potential for anachronisms, that the date for the text is not as old as it claims it is. So, the Bible claims to have been written about the beginnings of mankind. Yet, you get those kinds of statements that say, oh, no, it's not a first-hand account. It's somebody else claiming that he's writing a history. And then you find out, for example, the book of Joshua, book of Jesus. None of that happened, at least not in the order that the book claims it happened, not in the time frame that the book is assumed to be claimed to have had it happen. It is an anachronism in and of itself, and it's all screwed up and messed up. The cities didn't fall in that order, as the archaeological evidence shows a different order for certain destructions. And it depends on which time period you're talking about. If you're talking about when the Egyptians did campaigns to get the Canaanites to continue their tribute to Egypt, that's one thing. Then you have Assyrians, and then you have Babylonians, etc., depending on the time frame that you're talking about. And so Jericho, it collapsed several times, according to the archaeological record. It was rebuilt on top over and over again, but fell long before the supposed time frame of those events took place. So the walls of Jericho did eventually fall, as the author says, but they didn't fall when the author says they fell. And so that's imposing far further back into history of a more current event, when a more current author is talking about the historical event. And so it can be kind of tricky, but when you hear somebody say, oh, they figured out how the Bible can work, and they say, well, we just moved the timeline to a more current timeline of the author, and therefore it is now accurate. No. What they're trying to pull a wool over your eyes is that they've recognized anachronisms, and they're trying to cover it up and make it actual history. Work in the glory for Mormonism. There are Mormons who think that those characters are real, that they were real Mormons. No, they were not. But there's a bunch of errors in that series that I didn't bother to read. Oh, there's no way in hell I was going to fall for the fad. Oh, every Mormon's doing it. Just this once won't hurt. All the cool people are doing it. No one ever needs to know. It'll be our little secret. Just sign here with your blood. It's my own little thing that I developed over time, assembling all of the... Yeah. So, with Mormonism, Joseph Smith being the founder, and the church covering up, lying, and deceiving, what we have are anachronisms imposed onto Joseph Smith himself. The church claims that the Joseph Smith history is the official canon, and that's why it's in our scriptures. But it's not only inaccurate in that somebody else imposed themselves upon it after the fact, but also that Joseph Smith himself, with his own history, gets it wrong. Case in point, he claims that in the spring of 1820 that he had his first vision. And he gives us the Book of Mormon pattern of faith, where you read, ponder, and pray, and then you receive revelation, and then you act to fulfill that revelation in the flesh. So he's reading the passage of James, he's overcome by the Spirit, he then says, okay, in order to fulfill this, I'm going to go pray in the woods. And ta-da! It came to pass. And so that needs to be understood first and foremost, as all Mormons don't, is that he's trying to teach a doctrinal principle with his history of the church. Second, he then claims that he told his mother, I have learned for myself that Presbyterianism is not true. Presbyterianism? His mother joined the Presbyterians? Are you sure? When you understand actual history, Alvin died, and his funeral was held in 1823 by a Presbyterian preacher. And so that we can understand is where he understood the concept of Alvin's going to burn in hell from that Doctrine and Covenants passage. But he fails to mention it in his history that that they didn't join the Presbyterians. In Vermont, they were Congregationalists. It's a different religion. And it's confirmed by Joseph Sr. Being a part of the New Israelites of Nathaniel Wood. Lots of fun. The part about the Holiness to the Lord parchment with the seer stones in the hat trick, that all came from Justice Winchell that joined later on. Not too later on, because it didn't last for not too many years. But you need to understand that, because if you attribute Justice Winchell's influence to Nathaniel Wood, then you're going to get confused about who influenced who on Joseph Sr. And so you also have to know the differences between the different Christian religions. Another one involves Joseph Smith, after having his first vision, talking to a Methodist preacher. And the Methodist preacher said this and that, and there are no more revelations, that all died with the apostles, blah, blah, blah. Well, if Joseph was told not to join any religion, and he's telling a Methodist preacher after his first vision, what is he doing on record with the Methodists in Harmony, Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, of whom his wife Emma and her family were a part of? Why is he joining their church but then being rejected, and he and Emma and her family have to leave and go somewhere else? Like, Susquehanna River. See, he makes the mistake, whether that's intentional for the coding, which I'm sure it is, but he says Harmony Susquehanna River, Pennsylvania. They're two separate. There's Harmony, north of Pittsburgh, and then there's Susquehanna River, Pennsylvania. Two different places. And so he fails to bring that up when he's talking about the past. And so if he then moves Harmony over to Susquehanna, he's altering history and making a huge mistake, because the truth clarifies the true church history. And as Mormons, you can't get upset with me because I found this out. It's what is true. And so you're getting mad at the truth, and you're wanting to perpetuate the lie. What the hell is wrong with you? Don't you want to know the truth? That's what our whole religion is about, is embracing and seeking truth and light, which comes from God. And yet you want to perpetuate lies, deceptions, cover-ups? Seriously? Who does that? Who's the author of that? And you want to do that rather than embrace truth. So again, Mormons need to decide, are we Mormons or are we mice? Luciferians. And the sign on Temple Square says Luciferians. And Mormons are doing brilliantly in following Lucifer, deceiving and lying and covering up and committing all sorts of crimes. And so those are just some examples of anachronisms that are going on. But administration as well. Mormons assume that the current established administration, with the presidency and the Quorum of the 12 and the 70 and the... how many quorums now do we have? Brigham Young added like 70 of them. 70 quorums of 70. But I think we're at least 8 under Monson. He added some more, I think. It was him. I don't know if it was Hinckley. But maybe 10. Instead of 7 quorums of 70. But if you assume certain things, like if I were to write my history of my family, and I were to talk about how my dad gave me he ordained me a priest in the Aaronic priesthood as he was a 70. Now, how many Mormons would go, oh, wow, he was a general authority? Wow. See, all of a sudden, you've changed my history. Because you're putting in an anachronism. You're assuming that the current condition was the same in 1988. And that was not the case. Because in 1988, there was what was called stake 70s. And so Joseph Smith did not have just a quorum of 12. He did have a missionary quorum of 12, or the traveling 12, but he also had the standing 12, whom he called the High Council. They were the administrative part. They were to deal with excommunications. They were to deal with the business of the church. The missionaries, yeah, that's the keys of Peter. They go around preaching the gospel and setting up churches for people to preach the gospel, blah, blah, blah. It is not the key of Moses. which is belonging only to the president of the church. Remember, Moses and Elijah appears to Joseph Smith in the Kirtland Temple, gives him the keys. And yet they've switched it. Moses is the one who does missionary work with the gathering, and Peter, James, and John, who were the missionary work with the gathering, are now the administrative keys. And so you have Nelson, who takes a picture at the Vatican Temple, trying to take away the keys from Peter. Again, that's an anachronism. That was not the case under Joseph Smith. And so when the church leaders say, oh, Joseph Smith got the keys of Peter, James, and John to rule the kingdom of God on the earth. That was Brigham Young, who became the president of the Quorum of the 12 traveling missionaries. And so thus you now know why Brigham Young claims authority for the whole church with just the keys of Peter, the missionary. Okay. So it's sort of like the Catholics, who their Pope means bishop. And James, the brother of Jesus, in Acts 15, is the real leader of the church, as he's the one who makes the final decision over Peter. Okay. And so doctrine also. If Mormons assume that the current doctrines were what Joseph Smith believed in, you've pulled an anachronism. Doctrines of Joseph Smith are different than the current church. I gave you example with faith. If you believe that the temple rituals that you now experience were the same since the time of Joseph Smith, you've pulled an anachronism. And you've failed to understand that Nelson changed it during his tenure, and that it was changed by Benson in 91, and then it was changed after the United States came in with the Edmunds-Tucker Act, and then the Reed-Smoot hearings, which forced the church to say, okay, fine. The law of chastity is that a man and a woman, I can't remember, I have to read it, shall be legally and lawfully wedded. That's referring to the Edmunds-Tucker Act. Complying. They were forced to change the law of chastity. Why? Well, what was it before? Polygamy. Hello. And again, that's another anachronism in Mormonism, is that Mormons believe, oh yeah, Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. It was done in secret. And it was Brigham Young who brought it out publicly. Then the mean, bad America came and tried to persecute us for our religious freedom. You don't have a clue, do you? Again, the church has lied, deceived, and covered up. And so, yeah, we used to have a chapter on marriage for monogamy, and then we had section 131, which has now been gutted. But that also, Joseph Smith is telling a couple, a man and a woman, that they, once sealed in the temple, will be exalted. Oh, you can't have that. Only polygamous marriages get exalted. Thus, section 132 was put in, and 131 of Joseph Smith was gutted. But notice, 132 is blamed on Joseph Smith. Again, it's an anachronism, and you can use that anachronism test on section 132 to linguistically identify the date of when it was written. And when you find out that it was put in Brigham Young's Doctrine and Covenants the year before he died, now you see that's when it was written. When you understand that his previous year's divorced wife had him arrested and locked in jail. He was pissed. And so, yes, you can see him project onto Joseph Smith, as Joseph Smith apparently threatens Emma with her life if she does not allow Joseph to fool around with 10 virgins. So that's how you do linguistic history research on claims of historical texts, is by using or identifying anachronisms. Christ. Again, the Christ that Mormons currently believe in, anachronism, not Joseph Smith's Christ, not even Brigham Young's Christ. Remember, the church, or the United States, came in and shut the church down with the Edmunds-Tucker Act. And as part of hinge pointing away from Brigham Young, it became necessary to find another religion to be when they signed new Articles of Incorporation in 1923. After all that time being disincorporated by the United States. And so they chose evangelical mixed with a Mormon twist, as I call it. I'm kind of surprised nobody has made that drink yet for our bars. I guess they're still struggling to stay open after the trauma of the Zion Curtain. I was thinking it could be something like wine mixed with milk. But, yeah, maybe there's a reason why it wasn't invented. Yeah, Joseph Smith's Christ is talked about in the Book of Mormon. 1 Nephi, chapter 1, verse 2. The learning of the Jews who were before coinage and before the Babylonian captivity. And that needs to be understood when reading the Book of Mormon. Because if you imply on all the references to Christ and put in the Gospel's New Testament Christ into the Book of Mormon, oops! You pulled an anachronism. If you pull your Mormon twist Gospel's Christ into the Book of Mormon, oops, you pulled an anachronism. And so, yeah, the whole Book of Mormon is completely different than what you've been led to believe all these decades. So, that's just a sample of Mormon anachronisms, and hopefully this helps you in your pursuit of truth, because all of you want to pursue truth rather than perpetuate the lie, right? I know it's the fad thing to do to spread lies. I'm spreading a conspiracy theory, which is the wrong definition of conspiracy theory. It's actually lies. So, yep, there were no tennis shoes among the Nephites. There were no Nephites.